We are growing, changing, falling, and getting back up again. We are Life Church Livonia.
It is so good to see your smiling faces, and I am so excited that today is our third anniversary of a church being here, and I just love it. It's exciting, and I can't believe it's been 3 years. There's a part of me that's like, man, has it really been 3 years? And a part of me that's been like, it feels like I've been here way longer than that. And so we are so excited about what God is going to be doing in the coming years, but just want to just take a day to celebrate that a church has been born here in our midst, and you guys are the church. And so I can't wait to just eat a bunch of great food with you guys today and hang out. And if we've never had a chance to meet, I'd love to get to know you a little bit more over lunch today. We got a bunch of fun things going on. We got some cornhole going on, a little bit of a tournament. So I will see you on the cornhole field. And can't wait to do that and let your kids bounce in the bounce house and that kind of thing. So just want to invite everyone to make sure you guys stick around. So we are in the midst of a series called What Keeps You Up at Night? And really what this is about is asking the question, what are the things that when you lay down at night, your head hits the pillow, that keep you from rest? And so it's not even always sleeping at night. For some of us, it's just that worries and fears, anxieties, doubts, they keep us from ever being in a restful state. Whether it be at night on our pillow, whether it be in the early mornings of the hour, or whether it be throughout our day, that there's something going on that causes us to not allow for our spirit to be at rest. And we want to address those things and begin to give you a direction that you can head to overcome those struggles, those worries, those doubts, those fears. And for me, I don't know about you, but the kind of situation that presents itself in my life that causes me to be the least rested, that causes me to struggle the most, are times when I have to wait for something. I struggle to wait for anything, honestly. And especially when the things that we're waiting for have real like a deep burden attached to them, or a deep worry or deep fear. It's like a big life experience that we're waiting for. Think about the people that they go to the doctor, and they know that something's wrong, and they have the tests done, but they're waiting to get the results. Those days, those weeks, those whatever the amount of time it is that you're waiting for the results are brutal, because we're waiting for something that has a deep burden attached to it. Or what about those moments when your boss walks up to you on Friday afternoon and says, hey, I really need to talk to you about something, some concerns I have. Do you have any time to meet on Monday? And you're like, seriously, could we just talk about it right now? Because now I know that all weekend long, I'm going to be wondering, what is it that the boss wants to talk to me about? What did I do wrong? And more often than not, it's not even really anything big, but your mind makes it into something big all week long, right? All weekend long while you're worrying and fretting and not able to sleep, and then you get in and your boss wants to talk about moving the cubicles around or something. And you're like, why couldn't you have just told me that on Friday? This is ridiculous. But we hate to wait. And honestly, I'm not only in like those kind of moments, but I think sometimes it becomes a season for us that we're longing for a different type of life. And we're asking God the question, we're like, are you even real? Like, if you're real, could you please just make yourself known to me now? Because I don't know how much longer I can do this. And when we say I don't know how much longer I can do this, that alone tells you that you are in the waiting room of life. The waiting room of life. And I don't know about you, but I don't know anyone that likes waiting. I really dislike going to the doctor and getting there on time for my appointment and not actually seeing the doctor until an hour and a half later. I love it when the doctor spends a lot of time with me, but I don't like it when I have to wait for the doctor spending a lot of time with someone else. Because waiting is just something that we avoid at all costs in our culture. In fact, I actually think that we've created an entire kind of infrastructure in our culture to prevent us from having to wait. That we actually build our technology and our life around not having to wait. And honestly, most of the answers to our questions or the satisfaction of our needs and wants are only as far away from us as our phone is. Right? And so we're like, man, I'm really hungry. Well, what do? We pick up our phone. And within 15 to 20 minutes, you can have amazing, hot, delicious food delivered to your door. Or you're like, man, I really want to make something beautiful for dinner tonight, but I'm too lazy to go to the grocery store, and I have too much other things going on, and I don't want to go wait in those lines anyway. So what do? We pick up our phone, and our groceries get delivered to our house. Amazon gives 2-day shipping. But if you can't wait that long, they actually have a button that says, can't wait. We'll get it there in a day. And they're working on distribution hubs around the country so that you don't even have to wait 2 days or 1 day. And in some cases, in certain cities, they're rolling out same-day deliveries from Amazon. Because we don't like to wait. We build our entire life around avoiding situations where we might have to wait. And the problem is that doesn't work well when it comes to our relationship with God. Our fear of waiting and our avoidance of waiting actually backfires on us when we step into church and when we step into a relationship with God. And honestly, our phone can't help us with that. I know, because I tried to ask Siri this week, does God exist? And she gave me a rude answer. This is what she said. She said, that's a topic for another day and another assistant. I'm like, seriously? A simple question, Siri. So I told her, you're being difficult. And she's like, that's a topic for another day and another assistant. I'm like, but listen, our phones can't help us with that. Our phones can't help us with our faith. We can look up a question about the Bible and maybe get an accurate answer. Don't trust Siri to give you answers about things that only God can give. Waiting is an essential part. It's an essential part of our faith journey. It's a necessary ingredient. If you leave waiting out of your faith journey, if you avoid waiting in your faith journey, there will be something that's askew with the final product of your faith. It's almost as if, imagine that you're making a recipe and you're making bread and you forget to add yeast. It's going to be somewhat edible, but it won't rise. It won't become what it is designed to become. Waiting is an essential part of our faith journey, which is why in the Psalms, in Psalm 27:14, it says, wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord. And for many people, especially if they're early on in their journey of faith and their following of the pursuit of God through Jesus, they would read this verse and be like, ain't no way that this is becoming my life first, right? There's no way. Like, who would have this as their key verse that defines their life? Wait for the Lord? That does not sound like fun to me at all. And the answer, if you're wondering what kind of person would have this as their life verse, the answer is someone who has seen what's on the other side of waiting. Because when people see what's on the other side of waiting, then they go back and read this verse and they're like, I totally get it. It's amazing. Wait for the Lord. Be strong. Take heart. Have courage. The waiting is worth it. Wait for the Lord. Because when you do this, when you learn this, when you step into it, when you stop avoiding it, something amazing happens in your life as God transforms you in that process, because waiting is an essential ingredient to your faith journey and to mine. Pete Scazzaro, who wrote Emotionally Healthy Spirituality and a number of other books, he talks about the different stages we go through in our faith. And honestly, I think these stages fit perfectly with what we're talking about today. Because stage one is a life-changing awareness of God. And what happens is that something happens in your life. You come to church or you meet someone, a friend, and you have this moment where you're like, it's real. I actually think this whole God thing is legit. And you have this awakening, this awareness that God is real and I need God. And often it becomes a very emotional moment, and it's a beautiful moment, and we begin this journey of pursuing Jesus. Stage one is a life-changing awareness of God, and hopefully it moves us into the next stage, which is discipleship. And honestly, when we say discipleship, in part what we're talking about is there are things about following God that you need to know. that we find in Scripture and we find in relationship with other people that have already been following Jesus for a long time. We need to be discipled. We need to grow. We need to learn. And that's stage 2. And often what happens is that we have this life-changing awareness of God. We begin the process of being discipled, and then we jump into the active life, which is stage 3. And the active life is this is when we begin doing for God. It's when we're like, man, I am so thankful for what God has done to me, done in me and for me, and I would just want to give back to people. I want to sign up at church. I want to sign up to volunteer, and we should. That's important. That's why we did something like last week, like our ministry fair, where we give you guys an opportunity to serve. And I believe that every single one of you are gifted in some beautiful way to engage the kingdom of God, to engage the church. And it honestly is part of our discipleship to do that and flesh out our gifts amongst this community. But then something happens. I see it all the time in you and in other people that I minister alongside of, and something happens in your life. Some wound or some disappointment or some struggle of any kind, and we hit the wall. Stage 4. The wall and the inward journey. We hit this wall, and we're like, I don't think I can get past this. God, I don't even understand why you would fill in the blank. And the problem that I think we have in part with the wall is A, it hurts, and B, it requires us to do an inward journey, to be looking inside of us to see, Lord, what is it in me that needs to come into alignment with who you are? What's going on? What do I really believe? Who do I really trust? The wall causes us to begin to ask all those questions. But what we've seen, that many authors believe that, many theologians in the U.S. believe that 85% of American Christians never make it through the wall. They give up. They leave the church. They leave the faith. It's like giving the finger to God, for real. Like, I'm done. If this is who you are and this is how life is, then I'm done. And they leave and until they have the next life-changing awareness with God. We see it all the time that if people have this beautiful moment with Jesus and they recommit their life to God and they say, oh, I know you're real, God. And they're like, I'm going to do it this time. And they begin the discipleship process and they get part of the active life, and then they hit a wall again. And the wall requires waiting. The wall can't be broken through simply because you come to church next week, although that's part of the process. But it's not going to happen on one Sunday. The wall requires waiting, and it needs that inward journey. I love the way Pete describes the wall. He says, at the wall, we discover for the first time that our faith does not appear to work. We don't know where God is, what he is doing, where he is going, how he is getting us there, or when this will be over. And as I was reading this quote, I was thinking to myself, did he hear one of my prayers? Because I think I've prayed this exact prayer at some point, where I'm saying to God, what are you doing? Where are we going? When will this be over? What is happening in my life? And we hit the wall. And what the Lord wants us to do is to journey through that wall, journey through this dark night of the soul, as some authors call it, because there's life on the other side that is more beautiful than anything you've ever experienced before. It's normal and natural to ask those questions. It's normal and natural to ask these questions, like, what are you doing? What is going on? How are you getting us there? When will this be over? That's normal. But what we have to do is we have to genuinely ask the questions and then wait for the answer. But we hate waiting, especially when it really matters and our faith really matters. If we're able to push through the wall, we get to this next stage, which is stage 5 in this journey, which we call the journey outward. And honestly, it looks very similar to the active life. We're doing a lot of the same things. We're engaged in some of the same activities and maybe involved in some of the same ministries, but the difference is huge. Because whereas the first time we're active, but not active out of our relationship with God, we're active because of our relationship with God. Now we're actually moving forth from a brand new center point. God has transformed us as we journey through the wall. God has transformed us as we've looked inward. And now he's pointing us outward and saying, I have gifted you and made you just for this. And you can tell when people are on the journey outward, serving out of their giftedness, serving out of their healing, out of a place that was broken and now is healed. You can see it. And ultimately what you see, stage 6, is a person that is transformed by love. Hopefully we all know people that look like this. You're like, you before Jesus and you after Jesus, you before that really difficult time, the difficult season in your life, that almost broke you moment, you before then and you now is not the same person. God did something amazing in you and through you because you were willing to wait for the Lord in that really hard time. You met God. I can see it. I can see it in you. We can be transformed by love. And honestly, it would be impossible for me on one Sunday here on the stage to teach you everything you need to know about waiting. It's not even a task that I'm even going to attempt. But what I want to do today is I want to take us to the story of Abraham and point us to the story of Abraham in the book of Genesis. This is where the whole nation of Israel began with this guy. It's how we ended up with Jesus and how we ended up where we are today. It all began with this guy Abraham and a bunch of promises that God made to him, some of these promises that he never saw completed in his lifetime. Some of the promises that God gave to Abraham didn't find their fulfillment until multiple generations later. Talk about waiting. This guy knew what it was like to wait. Over and over again, he was faithful to God and he did what God asked him to do. And over again, he ended up waiting. But I think one of his most brutal seasons of waiting came as he waited for God to live into this promise that he had made to Abraham and Sarah that they would have a child. Because Abraham and Sarah were unable to conceive. They were unable to have any children. And it was heartbreaking to them, gut-wrenching. This is true for anyone here that is in the same spot where they long to have children, but they can't. And for Abraham, I think in particular, there was an added component to that where he's saying, well, hold on, God, how are the rest of the promises you made to me going to come to fulfillment unless I have a kid? Like, how are my descendants going to become this great nation unless I have a child? And so God promises him. God promises Sarah, you'll have a son. You will have a son. But from the moment that God made the promise till the time that it came to its full fulfillment and their son Isaac was 25 years. 25 years. Honestly, I've never waited for anything that long. I don't even know what that looks like. I haven't even really, in a lot of ways, been following Jesus, seriously following Jesus for that long. But Abraham and Sarah had 25 years of waiting for their son Isaac. And even though he's celebrated in Hebrews chapter 11 as in the Hall of Fame of faith, even though later we look back at Abraham and say, this guy had faith that was super unique, he didn't always wait well. Sarah did not always wait well. There were times when he doubted God's protection. He doubted God's provision. He doubted God's promises, honestly. And there comes a moment in their life when they're saying, well, God promised us a child, but it's not happening. And so Sarah actually comes to her husband and says, I'm okay if you want to cheat on me. She says, what wife says that? A desperate wife says that. A wife that is done waiting. If you want to move on and sleep with Hagar and have a baby through someone else, I give you permission to do it. And he does it. He actually cheats on his wife, trying to fulfill God's promise on his own. He's like, God, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it with Hagar. Literally. That's what he does. And they have Ishmael. And it messes a whole bunch of things up. Causes a huge amount of heartache and brokenness as a result of that sin and a result of their lack of trust in God. And the beautiful thing about the Lord is that even though they had this huge moral failure, even though they had this huge moment where they were clearly not trusting God's promises, God was still faithful. And after 25 years, Sarah becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son, and his name is Isaac. It's unbelievable. And you would think, after hearing that story, that God would be done making Abraham wait, right? Like, he's waited enough. But he hadn't. There was something else that God wanted to do because Abraham was still holding on to a particular outcome rather than holding on to God. There was still something in Abraham that he was holding on to the outcome. The outcome for him was a child, right? That was what his goal was, his focus was. And he was holding on to that stronger than he was holding on to the Lord. And so God had one more incredible moment of waiting that I think was the most brutal of them all. And it brings us to Genesis chapter 22. I want to tell you this story. It says, sometime later, God tested Abraham. We think that Isaac was probably about 15 years old. So sometime later, God tested Abraham, and he said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. And then God said, take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. This is ridiculous. As we read this scripture, and especially if you're new to church or you're new to faith, you're hearing that and you're going, wait a second. What kind of God asks a guy to sacrifice the son that he's been waiting for 20, that sounds sadistic and mean. You might be thinking to yourself, I don't even think I would want to follow a God that acts like that. Why would God want Isaac to be killed? And it breaks my heart to even read this. And as God is speaking, he says, take your son. Oh, and he rubs it in. Your only son. Oh, rubs it in even further. Whom you love, and kill him. I don't believe for a second that God ever desired for Isaac to die. What he longed for was this piece of Abraham to die that he was holding on to. He didn't want to kill Isaac. He wanted to kill off this part of Abraham that kept making him hold on to outcomes rather than hold on to the one who creates it all. There was something in him that needed to change, that needed to die. And this moment would be the waiting room that would define Abraham for the rest of his life. This moment would be the waiting room that would define him for the rest of his journey. And as crazy as this word from God was, I think what happens next might even be crazier. What did Abraham do? Verse 3, early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey, and he took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. And when he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. He did it. He woke up the next day, and said, son, we're going on a journey. My son whom I love, my only son, and we're going on a journey today. And he packs up the donkey and he gathers his servants and he gets all the things he needs to do what God asked him to do. And I want you to imagine how brutal every single one of those steps would have been. He says, I want you to journey to the region of Moriah, and I'm going to show you a mountain there. And you're going to climb that mountain. At the top, you're going to sacrifice your son to me. Imagine how difficult every single one of those footsteps would have been. Unbelievably painful, confusing. This is the wall. This is that inward journey. This is what keeps you up at night. I promise you, he didn't sleep much on that trip at all. Every night camping out, knowing that the next day he has to get up and walk closer and closer and closer to a moment that he prays will never come. Every single step was an act of obedience. Every single step was an actual leap of faith for Abraham in this, his most difficult of waiting rooms. We don't know exactly how far it was. We can guess and we can kind of try to figure out which mountain it might have been. It could have been as far as 60 miles. It could have been as close as 30 miles, but we know it was a significant journey. And it says in verse 4, on the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He knew it. That's the place. And he said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you. We will worship and then we will come back to you. Do you see that? His faith is growing with every step. We will worship and we will come back to you. Not only was every step an act of obedience and every step a leap of faith, but every single one of his steps was an act of worship. He didn't just worship when they got to the mountain. He worshiped with every step of obedience. I trust you, God. I trust you, God. I want to trust you, God. I'm struggling to trust you, God. I worship you, God. We're going to go up and worship on the mountain, and then we will come back to you. So Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering, and he placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife as the two of them went on together. And this next part, honestly, it makes me want to cry. If you really put yourself in this story, if you're a parent, they're walking up the mountain. Isaac and Abraham, just the two of them. Abraham knowing exactly what is going on, and Isaac not having a clue. And Isaac spoke up. He said to his father, Abraham, Father. Yes, son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? It's like, Daddy, I don't understand. Like, what's it? I know we're on this journey and you said we're going to worship and there's going to be an offering and I understand all that, but I don't see the offering. This is heart-wrenching. If I was Abraham in this moment, honestly, I would just turn around. I'd go back. I was like, I can't do this. This is my son. There's no way. That every step up the mountain gets even more difficult. Now that your son is looking at you and asking the questions that you were begging God that he would never ask. This is the heart-wrenching, scream-inducing waiting room moment that Abraham had to push through so that God could strip off of him the things that needed to be stripped away. And the way he responds in this moment, it's unbelievable. It says in verse 8, Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering. And the two of them went on together. And the question that I've been thinking about all week is, who told Abraham that God would provide the lamb? No one. Go back and read the story over and over again, and you look for a moment. Did God actually hint that was going to happen? If you go back to the initial conversation when God is saying, Abraham, and he says, here I am. And God says, I want you to take your son, your only son, the one that you love, and go to the region of Moriah, and on the mount that I will show you, I want you to sacrifice your son to me. He didn't then whisper on the side to him and say, P.S., I'm not really going to make you do it. Like, I'm going to hook you up at the very last moment. It's going to be sweet. It'll be a story you'll tell people forever. God didn't say that. You don't see that anywhere in the story. But with conviction, he looks his son in the eyes and he says, I trust my God. And he learned that trust, friends, in the waiting rooms of his life. He learned that trust in the 25 years that he waited for a son and saw God actually follow through on that promise. He learned it in all these other moments. You can go back through the life of Abraham and be like, that was one of those moments that led Abraham to this place where he believed in the character and the heart of his God so much that he was willing to go on a journey, not knowing what the outcome would be, but trusting that God would provide in a way that was miraculous. He learned those things in the waiting room. He could never have looked his son in the eyes and said this if he had learned this truth vicariously through someone else. If he had heard about God providing for someone else, he would never have been able to set out on that journey. He had learned it himself in the waiting rooms of life, and he had figured out that there was something on the other side and that it was a good and loving and amazing God. Abraham had learned the character of God during his previous 25-year wait. So the story goes on. And when they reached the place that God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. And he bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Put yourself in the story. Isaac, complete trust in daddy. Like, I trust you, daddy. If you say that there's going to be a sacrifice waiting for us and God's going to, I trust you. What? Wait. Why are you tying me up? Like, what's happening? This doesn't make any sense. And Isaac had trusted his dad, but Abraham was trusting his dad. And the two didn't seem to go together in this moment. And then he reached out his hand and he took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, here I am, he replied. I'm telling you, God would not have had to say my name twice in that moment, right? The moment that the first letter of my name, almost I heard B, like he's going to say Brian, I would have been like, here, I'm here. I was told, yes. I was waiting for you to speak. Here I am. His here I am takes on a weight in this moment that it had never had before. He says, do not lay a hand on that boy. Do not do anything to him. Now that I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. I see you trust me. I know that you love me and you trust me more than you trust any outcome. I know that you are willing to go the distance for me, and I see now in you a man who I'm willing to build everything that happens from this moment forward on. Your family will change the whole world. This is a huge moment for Abraham. And he looked up, and there in a thicket, he saw a ram caught by its horns. And he went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. You don't say. That's like the biggest no-brainer name for a mountain that's ever existed. When God shows up in this miraculous way, he's like, Isaac, from now on, we're calling this place the Lord will provide. And I'm telling everybody this story about how the Lord will provide, but I'm a little ashamed to tell a story because it makes me look bad because I was willing to do it in the first place. But I'm going to tell them anyway because it's so amazing that God was willing to do that. He made it through the wall. And he found God on the other side, waiting for him, walking next to him every single step of that journey. How did Abraham make it through the wall? How does Abraham's experience inform our experience? How can we make it through that difficult spot in our life? Just like Abraham, one step at a time. That's how we make it through the wall. Abraham acted on his belief that God had a plan and that he was going to bring it all the way to completion. Abraham acted on that belief. We don't make it through the wall by clinging to an outcome. We make it by doing the next right thing. We don't make it through the wall by clinging to an outcome. We make it through the wall by clinging to God in the midst of that and saying, Lord, what is my next right thing? Because we make the outcome, the end game, our goal, like what I'm going to get out of it. We miss the experience and we miss the transformation that can happen in the midst of that. For Abraham, it was one more step. One more step. That was his next right thing. But imagine the dialogue going on between him and the Lord. He takes a step, and Lord, I don't think I can go any further. And God says, one more step. He takes another step, and he says, Lord, my son and my servants think I'm crazy. I don't know what to do. The Lord says, take one more step. He gets to the mountain, and he looks up, and he thinks, Lord, I can't climb this. And God says, take one more step. Every step an act of obedience. Every step an act of trust. Every step an act of worship. Earlier we talked about Psalm 27:14. This beautiful psalm. It says, wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. When Abraham had this moment with God on Mount Moriah, this psalm hadn't even been written yet. David would be part of the descendants that would come out of Isaac. This psalm hadn't even been written yet, but if this psalm had been written and Abraham knew it, this is the song he would have been singing as he walked down the mountain that day with Isaac. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. He would have wanted to tell everyone the story. Like, this verse is true. This psalm is true. And he knew it was true because he had experienced that it was true. You cannot learn this truth through someone else's experience. You can only learn it through yours. When you push through the wall and you see the other side of waiting and you know the faithfulness of God. There's this woman named Vanitha Reisner, and I was reading a little bit of her story this past week about brutal moments of waiting for her, where she just was struggling deeply and was questioning the very nature and character of God, the very existence of God. And she tells her story about the way she made it through that time, the way she pushed through the wall and she saw the beautiful result on the other side. And this is what she says about waiting. She says, in retrospect, I can see that wait is the most precious answer God can give us. Who says that? Someone that's seen that it's true. She says, in retrospect, looking back on my life, I can finally see that wait is one of the most precious gifts, the most precious answers that God can give to us. Because of the benefits of waiting, because of the fruit of waiting, because of the transformation that happens in the process of waiting. What are those benefits? Some of you are probably sitting here and saying, I'd like to know what the benefits are. Well, the first I think is this, is that waiting refines our character and teaches us the character of God. Waiting refines our character. It cleans out all the extra baggage that doesn't belong there. It refines our character, and it teaches us what the character of our God is so that we can become a person that stares right at our children in the face and says, I know that God will provide. Because you know the character of your God. Waiting refines our character and teaches us the character of God. But not only that, but it also, waiting brings about spiritual transformation and creates unshakable faith. If you know someone in your life that you're like, that person has unshakable faith, I promise you they waited on the Lord at some point. I promise you that there was a period of waiting in their life, a wall moment that almost broke them, but they pushed through with God walking side by side with them, and it created this unshakable faith in the Lord that He will provide, and it transforms us from the inside out. Another one of the benefits of waiting is that waiting allows God to place something of Himself into our character that will mark the rest of our journey with Him. Think about that. It's like this deep wound is opened in your heart and God slips something in past all of our walls and barriers that we erect in our life. And He puts something into us that will mark us for the rest of our life in a beautiful way. Because it's on the other side of the wall that we see the most growth. It's on the other side of the wall that we see the most fruit in our life. If you're not in a waiting room now, you will be at some point. And the way you respond to that waiting room time, the way you respond to that wall will transform your life for good or for bad. Some of you will give up, and it breaks my heart. But my prayer is that our church would be the 15%. My prayer is that our church would be the 15% that pushes through and experience transformation. And so what I want you to do is as you pray this week, just ask the Lord, what's my next right thing? What's my next one step, Lord? And for some of you, honestly, it might just be coming back next week. Like even being here at church today was a big deal, and you just got to come back next week and put yourself in community. For some of you, it's to tell a friend that you're struggling and ask for spiritual wisdom and mentoring. To ask someone to walk alongside of you and making sure that the person you ask has actually gone through the wall and experienced the fruit of the other side. For some of you, it's going to be when you sign up to be a part of our small group this fall, or when you choose to go out in the lobby afterwards and sign up to go to the women's retreat. What's your next right thing? Don't worry about what's going to happen in 6 months or a year from now. Worry about what does the Lord want me to do tomorrow, one step at a time. That's how you make it through the wall. Next week, we're gonna spend the morning talking about spiritual disciplines, talking about the kind of things that people did who made it through walls, and we're going to teach on that. Come back next week and hear that. It's an important part of your process. And still for others here, your next right thing is that you need to step into stage one. That today needs to be the day when you have a life-transforming awakening that God is real and that God loves you and knows you. And as I read this story and I read about Abraham and Isaac, and about the Lord staying his hand and saying, no, don't lay a hand on him. Don't harm him. I've got something else for you. And God provides a sacrifice in that moment. I can't help but go to Jesus and realize that God himself gave his one and only son. He sacrificed. He actually went the full course with Jesus. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, his only begotten son, that we could have life, that Jesus could take on the penalty of our mistakes and our brokenness and our sin and our disconnectedness from God, that Jesus could bridge that gap between God and humans. Jesus went the distance for us. And maybe for some of you, today is your moment where you're like, I believe. I don't have all my questions figured out yet. I'm going to ask Siri later. She'll hook me up. But today I'm ready. Today I'm ready to take that first step of faith. I want to pray for you. So would you pray with me today? God, I just worship you in this place because you are faithful. God, I praise you for the ways you've met me in my dark nights of the soul. I praise you for the way that you've helped me to push through the wall time after time. It wasn't a singular experience for me. And I know that for others here in the room, God, we've had numerous wall moments, numerous almost broke me moments, God. And I praise you that you are faithful to walk us through every single one of those. And that we can see your faithfulness on the other side. I pray that everyone in this room would have the opportunity to experience what that looks like, because it is beautiful. And whatever it is, God, that people are struggling in, whatever their waiting room is right now in this room, Father, I pray that you would begin the process of revealing to them right now what their one next step is, what their next right thing is, God. And if that's you and you're ready to just commit yourself to Jesus, you're ready to say, I'm in, I'm ready to be set free. I just encourage you right now to pray in your own heart, in the quiet of your own mind, and say, God, here I am. I want life with you. I want to be right with you. I choose to believe that Jesus is who you said he is, and that by receiving him, by following him, that you can make things right in my soul. I ask that you forgive me, God. Guide me, God. Protect me, Lord. Provide for me. I commit my life to you. And Jesus, we just thank you that you are willing to do that time after time after time. We trust you. We thank you for the times of waiting. We pray these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.